Morning. It's March 18th, 2026. I'd like to call to order this meeting of the Broome County Industrial Development Agency and the Broome County Local Development Corporation Audit and Finance Committee. First order of business to accept the minutes of the February 18th, 2000. Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Next order of business is public comment. Anyone wishing to speak on matters pertaining to the Audit and Finance Committee? State your name. Being none, hearing none, we will close this portion of the meeting. Next on is new business, a resolution approving the 2025 BICBA audit.
Good morning, everyone. Per the requirements of the New York State Authority's Budget Office, we are to complete our financial audits for both Broome County IDA and Local Development Corporation LDC. I want to acknowledge and thank Marissa Robbins for leading our effort and the full team effort of our staff to get this done for submission as part of our Paris report by March 31st. With that, we have had the pleasure of working with Insero Advisors for a number of years now. So it's my pleasure to turn the floor over to Evan Cleveland to start with the BC IDA audit.
Great, thank you very much. Stacy mentioned I'm Evan Cleveland, audit partner with Insero CPAs. Here to present other results for both. You should have package in front of you. I'm going to work exclusively off the executive summary. And again, this is on the area. Awesome. So page one of the executive summary is just a snapshot of our audit results. So we're modified opinion stated for the IDA. It's a technical term for opinion, means your assets, liabilities, net position, revenues, and expenses, and all of those the highest level yet. We also perform an audit over the financial reporting in accordance with government auditing standards. Also unmodified opinion on that report. No material weaknesses, deficiencies, or internal control weaknesses. And then finally, we issue a report on investment in accordance with New York State Public Authorities Law, and then also next page, we issue a comment letter. You've noted that boilerplate language in the letters and next page, we're required to communicate with those chartered governments. We'll audit or do so through a specific letter, also within your packets. We'll turn to that letter because we have no comments of concern of note regarding any of these items. We have to tip on by the state. Next page is your revenue. So this is a sort of a snapshot of 25 versus 24, your year-over-year changes. Significant revenue categories, just some fluctuations from prior years, specifically with fee income, just timing of when projects happened, had a few large ones in the prior years. Gain and loss on sale of assets. IDA sold 129 Carlin Road during 2025. Have a nice gain associated with it. Additionally, investment income and loss was up quite a bit, so sold a lot of your investments for them. The next page is focusing on your expenses. There's significant changes year over year associated with professional fees, so we've had a lot more professional fees associated with 600 Main Street. Those are the years that there were additional expenses. Legal and costs. Next page is a 5-year snapshot of your asset buildings. So end of the year at 24.3 million in total assets for the IDA. That's some fluctuations in a few of the categories. Ones that I'll point out, the investments went down quite a bit, and you see where those went, down about 2.1 million. So bottom line, we can use investment proceeds in order to finance those purchases. Saw some reductions in your notes receivable, leases receivable, all this amortization, repayment on did see an increase in your loans receivable based on new loans exceeding loan payments. And then property health resale that went down based on the college road sale. At the bottom, variable liabilities, 30,000. They did go up slightly just based on timing of approvals at year end for accounts payable, and then through expenses, and then further inflows of leases that'll reduce as you receive these payments for which the idea is less or for this building itself. Any questions so far? Or? Next page is your net position. So total net position did go down 1.4 million from the previous year. See sort of a flip flop between net investment and capital assets and unrestricted. So as you move those funds through investments into capital assets, they also move that category as well. So net investment in capital assets is spent on your grant. Next page is your revenue for the IDA. So every year at 1.8 million, down slightly, about 740,000 from the previous year. Most of that was in the fee and food category. Had some few large fees in previous years. There was a Danton LLC was last year. So that was a big one, and then the year before was Blue Sun Wind. A couple really big projects there. Great income received a little bit of funds from the Appalachian Regional Commission, $87,000, and then the other significant changes in net loss and sale investments. So that's the Harlan Road sale again. Next page is focusing on your expenses. So end of the year at 2.2 million, up a little bit from 5 million the year before. And again, most of those are within your professional fees. About 1.3 million for the tech park itself. And then 600 Main Street is about 214,000. We have a little asterisk down here at the bottom, so you have it's a conditional grant with performance obligations or benchmarks that you're required to meet. So you have to spend funds and meet these benchmarks in order to recognize revenue. So the expectation is that the IDA will meet these benchmarks in 2026, and then thus be allowed to recognize revenue in 2026. So that should consider being in that position. That's all those expenses. Next page is our current and future accounting standards. So we did implement a new standard this year, the statement of concentrations of revenue and constraints on raising revenue. This did not have any impact on the statements. We do have a disclosure in the statements that says the agency not needed to be disclosed. Standard. We have a few that are coming up next year. As we say, all three is going to be a rather large one for us in particular for the financial statements. So at the beginning of the main financial report, there's a section called management system analysis, and that's going to have a lot more information for financial statements, more information on the financial statements themselves and changes year over year. It's understood that it's written for an auditor to understand in most cases. I can definitely tell you, first time I ever read an MD&A, I did not know what I was reading. Now I do, finally, after 2 years of the firm. So it's going to have a little bit more information for financial statements. So overall, the idea did very well. My opinion and finance, Audit report. So I'll open up the questions about the IDA audit. Or any of the numbers. You just keep this. This introducing Dakota. I apologize about that. So this is Dakota Plus from Worcester. He is with us. He worked on the audit with me and fair one reports. So for anyone here who's not really going to participate at all, it was a lot. It was training that was a lot before he participates in the board meetings. So he's just here. So next I'll jump into the LDC, which will be the LDC.
Broome. Yes, look for a motion. I'd like to move that. Second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Carried.
All right, well, on item number 5, I'm going to turn it back over to Evan for the LDC audit.
Perfect. So again, I'll be working off the executive summary for the LDC. Similar to the IDA and a modified opinion on the financial statements. Concern for clean opinion. Also, unmodified opinion and a report over financial reporting over control over financial reporting. So here we consider there significant work or not. This is with public facilities law and other issues. So for this entity, we perform a single audit. Over its federal work programs, we need to report on internal control for each of the federal program, which is one program, local fiscal recovery funds. So those are passed through Broome County to the LDC and disperses them out to the various subrecipients or ultimate beneficiaries of the grant itself. This again is an unmodified opinion on that. The opinions for that report, no audit findings. The total federal expenses were 1.4 million, and this is looks like it's the final year of us auditing this program for the entity that on all water. And then at the bottom, the issue management that's no. Similar to the IDA, we are required to communicate with those charged with governance at the conclusion of the audit. This also has no comments of concern regarding that letter, which is also in your packets. Regarding these items we have listed. Next page is your revenue. Pretty comparative year over year with government grants revenue. So as the funds are spent, the county recognize revenue and expense. So that we have the majority of the activity for the last 2 years. Similarly, on the expense side, federal grants, federal expense also makes up a significant portion. Again, this the local fiscal recovery fund, commonly referred to as the ARP program. Page 25, there were a few other things that did occur. So, had an investment in economic development to related party greater benefit over. Additional legal actions. Straight ahead. So next page is your total assets of local development work. End of the year at 762,000. So it did go down significantly based on the that was paid to the IDA upfront by Broome County for the state and local fiscal recovery fund. So as those funds get spent, both in your own revenue, this is revenue expense. Similarly, at the bottom, your unearned revenue and accounts payable also reduced as you spent state and local fiscal recovery funds. Next page is your net reserves. One category for this. Down based on just expenses a little bit. Next page is the total revenue. So end of the year, 1.5 million. Again, down significantly as the state renewable fiscal recovery fund grant includes your requires 12/31/26. So that's a significant change, and then within other income, that's an income that donates time and expense to the local government for the county administration. The next page is your expenses. So end of the year at 1.8 million. Again, down significantly based on federal and grant expense that we noted in my chart. Other areas, the investment in economic development. And within your other expense, we have some additional items for Watson Boulevard, and then so similar to the IEA, we have these accounting standards to implement, and then coming up. So once we had no impact on financial statements, we did have a disclosure that they were evaluated. And that nothing was required to be further disclosed associated with that standard. And then as we see, will bring will affect us entity also. It's very well. You recall prior year we did have a couple of things last year, and this year significantly better. No audit findings. And that also Teresa for the single audit.
So I lost power here.
So
So we put for no other question for motion to approve. So moved. Second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Carried. Next order of business is resolution approving various policies of the Broome County IBA required by New York State Public Authorities law.
Yeah, addressed in item 16. The authority's budget office requires the BCIDA and the BC LDC to review its financial policies annually, including the investment and deposit policy, internal control of financial accountability policy, purchasing policy, property acquisition guidelines, and property each year. Policies must either be updated or recommended for reapproval as written for the upcoming year. Staff have reviewed the policies listed above and recommend that they be approved with revisions to the internal controls and financial accountability policy. And in addition, in accordance with ABO best practices, we developed a new discretionary funding policy for consideration. At this time, I'm going to station code changes and discuss the new policy.
Thank you, Natalie. As you know, the board has identified as a strategic plan objective, continuous improvement and operational excellence in how we conduct ourselves. And as always, so part of that, we also review all of our policies and procedures on an annual basis. This year, we do have some recommendations, as Natalie noted, for some revisions. I'm going to briefly touch upon the IDA and the LDC virtually mirror. When we get into the LDC, there's a slight modification to our bylaws that I'll also address. But with regard to the internal controls policy, under reporting of expenditures under $5,000, the current policy requires a monthly report of expenditures to be electronically submitted to the board. Let's update to modify so that the report will be submitted to the chair of the Audit and Finance Committee for review. And certainly if the chair feels that the board needs additional information, that would be the recommendation of the chair. Updated staff title for financial responsibilities. This is just an update to the policy to recognize a modification to a title we have now within the staffing plan. Several actions have been updated to reflect that change. Responsibilities previously assigned to finance and HR are now assigned to financial controller Marissa Robbins. So that's just the modifications for alignment with how we now the new title. Signature authority for disbursements. The language has also been updated regarding disbursement signatures. If you recall, during the COVID pandemic, because it was very difficult to get to anyone, the board had approved both the executive director and the director of operations to serve as two required signatures. That also was reaffirmed, I believe it was last year. We're actually going to recommend that we go back to two signatures, one being either the executive director or director of operations, and the second being an officer of the board. And then as the one final update to the internal controls would be the employee reimbursements approval requirements, just codifying that the process in which those are done. The executive director will receive approval of employment reimbursements from the chairman of the board, and then leadership staff, including the controller and director of operations, would receive approvals from the executive director, and then all IDA staff would receive approval from the director of operations. So it's just separating, parsing out the process and for better clarity and understanding of the process. And additionally, we're also recommending for both the IDA and the LDC a new policy, which historically the organization has not had, which is a discretionary spending policy, which is consistent with ABO best practices. This formalizing guidelines for discretionary expenditures, including travel, meals, related business expenses, to ensure they are aligned with the agency's mission. So if there's any questions on those, take them.
There's no questions, look for a motion.
I think there's one more change, right?
That's for LDC.
Oh,
We're just doing IDA.
It's the idea.
Yeah,
Go approve the idea. Second, all in favor? Opposed?
okay. So I will not repeat everything I just said because they all apply to the LDC. However, we are adding one modification to the LDC bylaws, which was just something we did not notice previously. The BC LDC bylaws currently state that we are to provide written notice of all meetings, together with minutes of the preceding meeting, agenda, and appropriate supporting materials within not less than 10 days before each meeting. We would just like to amend so that's in alignment with our process with the IDA, which is 7 days or 1 week prior to. So it's just a slight modification to the language so that there's consistency. That's it.
Motion to approve as modified. So second. Second, all in favor? Aye. I think that's all we have. No old business, sure. Motion to adjourn. Move, second. Here.
Yeah.
Oh.